Mannequin Chill is back following week 10, and we are feeling a little bit down after this week. This isn't a soap opera, but this is going to be a special episode where we zoom in on an individual player. So we're going to call this Mannequin Chill and the Young and the Restless, referring to quarterback Bryce Young, rookie from the Panthers, was the consensus QB2 off boards. And people will lie and say they had CJ Stroud over him, but most of the drafts I was in, Shane, it was Bryce Young before CJ Stroud. In fact, we talked about this on the show we did before the season. I got stuck with CJ Stroud in a lot of places because I wanted to get a couple more shares of Bryce Young, and it was, well, he goes before CJ Stroud. And I couldn't trade up. You know, I tried to trade up for very, very minimal, just figuring, hey, no big deal. I'll just take one, and I'll take CJ if I can't trade up to get Bryce, but can I maybe move up a third and get Bryce? And it was always no, Bryce over CJ. So we'll start it with that. Initial impressions, initial thoughts. This was a topic that you wanted to cover that our subscribers and Discord members have asked us to talk a little bit about. So here we are, the Young and the Restless. Shane, Bryce Young, thoughts?
The world is on fire and everything is terrible. Look, things don't look well, right? Me and you are looking up a bunch of stats for funsies just to see how bad Bryce Young is right now. One of the fun things I looked at on Pro Football Reference is his bad throw rate, which is a percentage of poor throws per pass attempt. Excludes spikes and throwaways. My dude is ranked second worst in the league. That seems bad, right? But you know who's third worst in the league? CJ Stroud. So then I also decided, well, okay, that's weird. Let me go look at the on-target throws, which for some reason don't correlate directly, and I'm not sure why. If anyone's smart enough to figure that out watching, feel free to reach out to me. On-target throw percentage. Bryce Young is 9th in the league, and CJ Stroud is 30th. That's one of those you can make stats say whatever you want them to say sometimes type of deal. I don't know. I will say this. I'm concerned about Bryce Young. Unfortunately, there's really not an out. There's nothing you can do about it. And like you said, before the season, I did like Stroud, but I ended up with more Young than Stroud. I thought I evened that out. But even if I didn't, and even if I had ended up with more Stroud than Young, it wasn't because I had a ton of conviction over one over the other. Not a ton. I like Stroud a little better, but not enough, apparently, because I was just going, all right, I'll take one here and one there, one here and one there, because, you know, portfolio. I didn't want to get overloaded with one guy. But unfortunately, right now, I have more Young than Stroud, when Stroud is the premier asset in Dynasty football to trade right now, or trade away, or to own. And Bryce Young, you'd be hard-pressed to trade Bryce Young for Brock Purdy right now, I think, even though KTC has Bryce Young above Brock Purdy in rankings. So it's interesting because he's truly underperformed. If anyone watched the game on Thursday, part of that you could say has to do with some of the coaching staff. This feels a lot like Justin Fields' rookie season when they refused to use play action passes, which have a significantly better success rate, especially for rookie quarterbacks. This is the offense that he's in. There's word that Carolina's not happy with the coaching staff, so I'd like to see what's going to happen there. But yeah, no, this is not the first 9-10 games that we expected out of Bryce Young, right? I expected him to struggle a little bit, but I did expect to see some flashes, and we've yet to see any flash.
Bryce Young's played 8 games. He obviously missed 1 game with his injury, so he's only played half a season, right? But if you look at his actual fantasy production, it's offering you very, very little in terms of fantasy production. He's had basically 1 good fantasy game this year. If you're just looking at standard scoring, he's essentially had 1 game where he had a shot to crack the top 15. Everything else has been less than 14 points. He's had quite a few games where he's in the single digits. His passing efficiency, which, again, it's a small sample size, but if you take what he's done through 8 games thus far and you put that in the last 5 years, he's only better than 6 other QBs. Now, typically, you want to see a little bit of a higher sample size on this before you make a decision. He's already played, 362 plays or 362 snaps as a starting quarterback. So it's not like it's such a small sample size that you can't gauge him on this. There's plenty of other guys in here where they only have like a season and a half or so, and the numbers just don't trend in the right direction. It's very similar to the article I wrote earlier this year on Justin Fields, where it's just like, I get it. There's the allure of what Justin Fields could be. There's the allure of what his mobility could bring to an offense if he gets into the right situation. But the reality is these numbers tend to be very predictive in terms of if guys are future starters. So I'm not writing Bryce Young off yet, but let's just say if you looked at this list of the 62 QBs that qualify, the names that he is around are not flattering. In fact, the aforementioned Fields is the closest one in the group where you'd be like, that guy's even close to having any dynasty value. All the others are almost strictly backup quarterbacks that you're like, yeah, sure, I'll take that guy because he's a backup quarterback, but not at all close to what we're talking about with what his current dynasty value is. So if you look at that, he's QB 14 on keep trade cut, which you already said is a lie. Nowhere near him actually pulling that from a perspective of if you tried to trade him today, would you be able to get this? So let's kind of go through the guys that are below him real quick, Shane, and see if you even have a prayer to get these guys. And then if you answer no, what would you be willing to add to get into this tier? Because I think everybody above him, even Justin Fields, I would take over Bryce Young at this point, just because I think there's probably a better window for Justin Fields if he scores points. And that's another guy that he says he's QB 13 on keep trade cut, which is also fake. You know, you're not getting that for Justin Fields, but excluding Fields, like the top 12 are not even close. Mahomes, Hurts, Allen, Burrow, Stroud, Herbert, Lamar, Richardson, Lawrence, Tua, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott. None of those are even close for you to get for Bryce Young, right? Now, going below him, Jared Goff, Brock Purdy, Sam Howell, Deshaun Watson. You would agree all those are going to get laughed at if you try to get those for Bryce Young, right?
Yeah, people don't like Deshaun Watson, so that's always a possibility. I think anyone that has Brock Purdy at this point is set on him. Sam Howell, I think you could get Sam Howell. Sam Howell's the only one I think you could get, legitimately, with no fuss. Deshaun Watson, you'd need specific circumstances. You'd need someone that's been trying to bail on him and just could never find the right time, and they're just like, all right, I'm done, which would be a weird time to do it after last week's game, but whatever.
Wouldn't you agree that the person that probably has Watson and probably has Brock Purdy are already the ones that have liked them more than the market in the past, given where they came from?
Yes.
So it's unlikely you probably get those because you're prying them away from a manager who already was like, okay, I want that guy specifically. Jared Goff, I think he's been too good. I think people like the Lions offense enough where you're not getting him. So let's talk Sam Howell. That's probably the one that I think you could get. Now, if you have to make a bet on who has more quote-unquote job security, I think it's fair to say it's Bryce Young. He's going to have a longer leash than Sam Howell. But I think the thing that we get caught up in is, what does a long leash mean, Shane? You would agree Bryce Young's probably not even startable the rest of the year, right? So what does his long leash or his value insulation mean if A, he's not startable, and B, when you actually put that value insulation on the open market, the best you can get is Sam Howell. You know what I mean?
Right.
What does that even mean when you have that value insulation? What's the takeaway here?
His job security matters absolutely not at all right now. It doesn't, because like you said, you can't start him. I made a comment in the DTM5 Discord on Sunday night that I learned my lesson, and I will never start Bryce Young over Josh Dobbs again for the rest of the season, because I did that in like 2 leagues. I can't imagine you're starting him because he's in the Will Levis, Kenny Pickett, Tyler Badgett range, where 8 to 13 points. 13 points is what you're hoping for, which is absolutely depressing at a quarterback position. So no, he's not startable. So that value insulation, really, there is none there. There's nothing given just because he has a starting role. Sam Howell might not have a starting role next year. It's debatable, I guess, in some people's minds. In my mind, it's pretty clear that he will. Due to the fact I can actually start Sam Howell the rest of this season, and he'll give me high-end production, which is already making me go, all right, is that worth giving up on Bryce Young? Now, I'm not saying I definitely would, but it's at least enters your mind.
So we have to do 2 things to kind of assess the future here. Is, first of all, let's talk about the future startability of Bryce Young. Now, we have no clue, what necessarily the team's going to do around him, so we won't really know how he's going to progress in terms of becoming a startable fantasy asset. But right now, in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues, he is quarterback 28, and there's a couple guys that are in that range that are either pure backups, or they're guys that have been benched, so they've missed a half a game, or they're guys that have come in halfway through a game. So even that might be a little misleading. But let's talk about him becoming even just passable into next year. Forgetting about his job security, he's going to have a starting job next year and probably the year after. He's going to get, usually these guys get 2 years after their rookie deal to see if they're truly going to be the guy. It's that 3rd year where it's where Justin Fields is at this year. It's where Mac Jones is at this year. It's kind of like, this feels like the breaking point where if the team and the quarterback is bad for most of those first 3 years, you're looking at, all right, the path to them having another shot at a QB, the discussion starts to come up. So he's probably going to get 2 more years. But let's just examine, what is it going to take for him to become startable over the next year, to the point where you're like, all right, I can just stomach the fact that he's going to have kind of like Kenny Pickett, Mac Jones job security. That's kind of where I put him as going into year 2. You're like, okay, I'll take this guy as my QB2. Not excited about it. I hope I can use him. But isn't that complicated by the fact that there's a coaching staff that's in flux? They traded away their first round pick. And we were looking at their pass blocking ratings. The Panthers are the second worst. So you have a QB with a bad offensive line and no weapons and no first round pick. So how does it get to even a passable range? Or are you willing to bet that it doesn't get to a passable range? And maybe in 2 years it does, but I don't have time to wait 2 years. You know what I mean? So what do you do?
Here's the thing, the time thing, right? We've already discussed the best you're probably going to be able to do right now with Bryce Young is Sam Howell. If you add a first to Bryce Young, will you get Trevor Lawrence? Probably, but do I even want to make that bet? Like, is that cost to get to Trevor Lawrence really doesn't appeal to me. I can't use him to tier up to anyone significant, right? We've already discussed that. There's absolutely no way I can use Bryce Young as a significant piece to get up to Jalen Hurts. He's almost in that Daniel Jones territory we talked about last year, where he doesn't even count. Like, he's just a throw into the deal. So time doesn't really concern me. Obviously, what I want to see is Frank Reich to get fired or bring on an offensive coordinator, because he's terrible at it. And I know he's already given up play calling duties in his first season there, which is not a great sign. But they're going to have to overpay for offensive linemen, and they're going to have to overpay to get wide receivers. And we were looking at the wide receiver free agent market. I don't know where that wide receiver comes from. The only player that I could find that would fit the mold, that might not get tagged, that you could overpay and might be able to produce there, Gabe Davis. That was the best name I could come up with. Like T. Higgins, we talked about T. Higgins, Michael Pittman. They're not likely to go anywhere. If you like a low-end guy like Rashid Shaheed, he's not an unrestricted free agent. He's the other one where he didn't even get drafted. So the team has the right to tag him, and they get a chance to match it. So the wide receiver market's going to be really, really stagnant. They don't have draft picks to draft a high-end wide receiver. They're going to need to either trade for a wide receiver or overpay for someone like Gabe Davis. But that's really going to be their only options. So it's a limited window, which is a little concerning.
Yeah, I mean, and there's a possibility they could trade for one of those guys, but it would probably cost them, typically those tagged receivers, Hollywood Brown, AJ Brown, those guys cost a first rounder. You know what I mean? Like they don't just come, you don't just buy them for a third round pick. So it would probably cost them their second round pick, which is going to be at the very top of the draft, plus something else. And at that point, aren't you better off just drafting a receiver there than trading for one of those guys, giving up a second and a fourth or something like that, to then sign a guy for a massive deal? And Higgins is good. Michael Pittman is good. But as soon as I'm paying him a top 5 receiver contract, I'm probably overpaying, right? I don't see how it gets better within 1 year. 2 years maybe, but in 2 years, you're now looking at, this is the make or break year for Bryce Young. And I would think that's probably the Panthers' plan. They know they're only going to be able to do so much next year. Next year is like, don't just kill the guy and kill his confidence. But by year 3, you have to be like, hey, we're going to put around him as much as we can, and it's make or break. Kind of like the Bears tried to do this year. Like, this was Fields' make or break year. Can he bring them out of the top 2 or 3 in the draft? And thus far, he really hasn't been able to do it. Now he's been injured, but it feels like that's kind of where Bryce is going to end up. But how much usability is going to have between now and then? If I can get out on him, even if it isn't to tier up, my thing is you're not even guaranteed to be able to use him. And even if you can use him, what are you going to get next year if he's usable? QB 21?
We are really bad at predicting what's going to happen in the future, right? Like
Correct.
we think we know what's going to happen, but maybe Carolina does upgrade their offensive line and suddenly Young looks a lot better. There's some question as to why they don't run an offense that's a little more similar to what they ran in Alabama for Bryce Young, which would make sense. If a quarterback succeeds in college, you'd like to see some of that transition to their pro team, but it hasn't. So there are outs for him, and it's more, do we think he's talented enough that if the situation improves even slightly, that he'll be usable? I think he's still talented enough that if the line improves and they tailor the offense towards him, that he could have a successful season. Look at CJ Stroud. His weapons are Nico Collins is nice, Tank Dell is nice, Noah Brown. It's not like he has world beaters. He has a good, competent wide receiver core, which is really all you need if you have an offense that's schemed well. But that's the big thing. We have to hope that Carolina gets an offense that is schemed well, and that doesn't seem to be the case with Frank Reich.
And Stroud has the runoff of the Shanahan scheme that he's playing in right now. So it's kind of like you need a couple guys that can do certain things, but a lot of it is the scheme. And that's not saying that Stroud isn't, producing his own success, but it's probably fair to say he was set up to succeed. And then his talent has come in and been like, damn, not only is it the scheme, but it's this guy on top of it that already is making plays like he's a 3 or 4 year vet. So with Bryce, let's talk about the options. Aside from, try to go tier up to Trevor Lawrence or the guys in that top 12 tier, which is going to be almost impossible. You already kind of said you can try to tier up to the other guys that are right above him. So, guys like Goff or Brock Purdy, Sam Howell, Watson, those guys are probably right above Bryce if you truly take what the market is. But let's talk about the guys that are probably attainable for him or just the cash out price in general. So we're going to start with the cash out price in general, Shane. Are you willing to move Bryce Young for a top 8 pick next year, but no chance to be in the top 4?
No.
So a mid first, you're not doing that?
No.
Okay. Would you move him for any of these quarterbacks right now? Jordan Love?
No.
Will Levis?
No.
Geno Smith?
No.
Russell Wilson?
No.
Baker Mayfield?
No.
What would you need on top of one of those guys to trade away Bryce Young?
More than the other team is willing to pay, which would be an additional first. Jordan Love is out of the way. I wouldn't even take a first in Jordan Love for Bryce Young. Like I would still say no.
Wow.
There's other guys. You could get it done with a first, and not in every league. And again, this part of the allure. One of the benefits of playing in a number of leagues is I can do that in 3 leagues and still have some exposure to Young.
Is Kenny Pickett in the Jordan Love?
No,
he doesn't even count.
Yeah, he doesn't. He's so bad that we've seen. Look, if Bryce Young is still doing this at the same juncture of Kenny Pickett's career, I'll speak of Bryce Young in the same way. I'm willing to hold on to Bryce Young. And the more I thought about it after we talked, if I didn't already have a 20% share of him in my leagues, I would actually look to buy a little. And it seems like that's a terrible idea. But we also, at one point or another, thought it was a bad idea to buy on Lamar Jackson, Kyler Murray, who now everybody loves off of 1 game, and Deshaun Watson, who's had 2 good games, and now all of a sudden people like it a little bit again. So this is when you're going to be able to get quarterbacks at a discount, right? You're never going to get Patrick Mahomes at the type of discount that you could get a Bryce Young. Like, that's just never going to happen unless he blows out both his knees and loses a toe. So I'm okay actually adding some of them to my portfolio, assuming that it's cheap enough.
So let's just go real quick. Cross-positional trades for Bryce Young. Because if I look at where he fits in the QB landscape relative to wide receivers, I'm going to give you some names and tell me right now, assuming your QB room is adequate enough. And if it's not adequate enough and you're relying on Bryce Young, you're probably screwed anyway. So just assuming he's a QB you're willing to trade for a wide receiver, any of these names would you trade Bryce Young away for? Drake London?
No.
Michael Pittman?
No.
T. Higgins or DK Metcalf?
No.
So basically, you're saying Bryce Young is more valuable than a top 15 receiver, basically, or he's right in that range because all those guys make up wide receiver 16 to 20. I just named you.
The only one that I would give serious consideration to is Michael Pittman because he's one of the target hogs that I'll be talking about in one of my upcoming articles. But Pittman's the one that gives me pause. DK and T. Higgins, I'm fine.
How about Jackson Smith and Jigba?
I actually thought about sending that trade straight up in a league and couldn't pull the trigger. That's in the realm.
And I assume these 3 you would do just based on what you've said in the past. Brandon Ayuk. Who's still on the fence on Brandon Ayuk? Devontae Smith? Still on the fence?
I'm taking Young over Smith.
Puka Nacua?
I think I'm still going Puka. I know Puka's numbers have been down a little bit, but Puka's target share is still elite, and I believe he's one of the players with 30% target share.
And then now, finally, up to wide receiver 10 as of today, Jordan Addison.
Interesting.
And whether you take Bryce or Jordan Addison, this is your cut line, right? Right around that, like top 12, top 15. That's the cut line. Okay.
Yeah. And Puka Nacua, 32% target share. And then I think it goes without question. Obviously, you're taking A.J. Brown, C.D. Lamb, Marvin Harrison Jr.
Those guys are all all a tier ahead. So here's my other question. What players are you willing to add, let's call it a mid to late first, on to Bryce Young to get? So I'm going to go down the line. Lamar Jackson. Easy?
Yes.
Anthony Richardson. Right now.
No.
Interesting. Neither are usable for the rest of the year, so that clearly shows where your break is. All right.
No.
Trevor Lawrence.
No.
Okay. Tua Tagovailoa.
Mid first.
Yeah, mid first. You're in fourth place, and you somehow have Bryce Young, and you're going, all right, I can throw my first and this Bryce Young and see what's the best thing I can get, and that's a quarterback you might be able to get. Would you do it?
I think I would, even though Tua has sucked against every good team he's played.
And then last two, Dak Prescott.
Yeah, we were talking about that. I think you have to. We were looking at his schedule the rest of this year. And assuming you're competing, you're in fourth place. The more I thought about this, I would have to say Dak's one of those.
Yeah, fun fact on Dak Prescott, the last month he has created more efficiency in a 4-game stretch than any QB in the last decade. That's how good he's been in the last month. And you wouldn't really hear about it, but I was just listening to a show today and they were talking about Dak Prescott. Right now, if he continues to play like this, he's the favorite for the MVP in the league, which is insane. But it would mean he ends up running the table, beating the Eagles, winning the division, being, all the accolades that would come with being an MVP. Like, you got to kind of consider that. And I know your thoughts on Kyler, so I'm guessing you would add that mid first to Bryce to get Kyler, right?
Without a doubt.
Everything we've said about Bryce Young has basically been the opposite from CJ Stroud. So maybe we'll do a future show on CJ Stroud and kind of how to handle that, because we're to the point where he's already been crowned basically like the QB 4 or 5 in Dynasty within half a season. And not that he doesn't deserve to be there, but historically, when the QBs that haven't shown like an elite ceiling, which is hard to say CJ Stroud, he's been good, but he hasn't shown like a fantasy breaking ceiling yet. When those guys hit that QB 4-ish value, it's kind of time to go the other way and sell a couple of them. As hard as it is to sell them, there's probably some pivots you can make with CJ Stroud. So final thoughts on Bryce Young, final thoughts on anything more actionable you can think of if you're a disgruntled Bryce Young owner.
I will say, and I don't always preach this, but I will preach some patience unless a deal presents itself that you just have to make. Like Scott was saying, if you can get Lamar Jackson or Kyler Murray for giving up Bryce Young and a mid to late 24 first or a 25 first, that's fine. I just don't want to see people giving up on him in terms of, all right, well, I'm trading Bryce Young for Daniel Jones. I wouldn't make, just moves that make no sense. If you can tier up and the price isn't too much, fine. Otherwise, have some patience. I mean, the guy was number 1 overall pick. I know it's been a rough 9 games, but you can go look throughout the history of Dynasty football. There's players that have improved as they've played more games, and we're going to have to hope that maybe this turns into a T-Law year 2 season, and then you can get out at full price.
Yeah, maybe we'll have a update on this at some point. I hope it gets better. You hope it gets better. Even if I don't have a ton of Bryce Young, I still don't want to see a guy that had that value just turn into another bust. That's not fun for the sport overall, and we'll continue to follow this. But for this, good luck to everybody in week 11, and we will see you next week. Manic and chill out.